My name is Claire Donovan. I am 28 years old. I used to believe that when you married someone, you were building a life together, not signing away pieces of yourself one quiet signature at a time. But that belief cracked open on a Tuesday afternoon in our home on Kiawa Island, and once it started breaking, there was no stopping it. You know how some stories start with a single phone call that changes everything. Mine did too, except the voice on the other end wasn't warning me about a stranger. It was someone I had trusted for years, telling me that the person I shared a bed with every night had been quietly emptying the life we were supposed to build. If you've ever felt the ground tilt under what you thought was solid, stay with me for a minute. I need to tell this the way it actually happened. The house on Kiawa was everything Ryan had promised when we got married 3 years ago. Private, gated with views of the marsh that turned gold in the late afternoon light. I worked from the sunroom most days, handling high-end client projects in interior design. Ryan handled the real estate side of things, always talking about the next development, the next investment. He was strategic patient, the kind of man who never raised his voice, but always got his way in the end. I thought that steadiness was safety. I was wrong. It started with a phone call from Jenna Walsh. She had worked with my parents years ago on their financial planning, and even after my mother passed, Jenna would check in every few months just to see how I was doing. That Tuesday, she didn't ask about the weather or my latest project. Her voice was low, careful. "Claire, I hate making this call," she said, "but I noticed some transfers out of the trust accounts your parents set up for you. Large ones. And they don't match anything you've authorized in the past. I didn't want to email it." My stomach dropped. The trust was supposed to be mine alone, something my parents had created so I would always have independence. Ryan had access because we were married, but we had agreed he would only use it for joint things we discussed. I thanked Jenna, hung up, and sat there with the phone in my hand until the screen went dark. I didn't confront him right away. That was the part that still makes me ache when I think about it. I gave him the benefit of every doubt I had left. I told myself Jenna must have made a mistake, that the transfers were probably for the new property he had been talking about, the one that was going to be our future. I even pulled up the account statements myself and stared at the numbers until they blurred. There were withdrawals I didn't recognize moving through accounts I barely paid attention to because Ryan always said he would handle the finances so I could focus on my work. That evening I mentioned it softly while we were making dinner in the kitchen that overlooked the golf course. Jenna called today. She said there were some large transfers from the trust. Do you know what those were for? He didn't look up from the cutting board. His knife kept moving in that calm, even rhythm he had. "She's overstepping. I moved some money around for the new development. It's an investment in us. You trust me with that, don't you?" The way he said it wasn't angry. It was disappointed, like I had failed a test I didn't know I was taking. I felt small in my own kitchen. I nodded because it was easier than pushing. But the doubt stayed. The next morning I went into the storage room above the garage. My mother's things were still there in boxes I hadn't been able to bring myself to sort through since the funeral. I told myself I was finally ready to donate some clothes clear space. What I found instead was a small leather-bound diary at the bottom of one box, the kind she used to carry everywhere. The pages were yellowed at the edges. Most of the entries were ordinary little notes about garden plans and phone calls with friends. But near the back, in handwriting that got shakier toward the end, there were lines about the trust. She had written that she and my father wanted me to have something that was mine, no matter what happened in my life. She worried about me marrying someone who might see it as shared property instead of my safety net. The date on that entry was 2 years before I even met Ryan. I sat on the concrete floor of the storage room with the diary in my lap and felt something cold settle in my chest. I didn't tell Ryan about the diary. Instead, I called my brother Tyler. He had always been the one who understood money in ways I didn't. He had built something big over the last few years, a development company that seemed to appear out of nowhere with projects up and down the coast. I had been proud of him. When I told him what Jenna said and what I had found in the diary, there was a long pause on his end. "Claire, don't do anything yet," he said finally. "Let me look into the transfers, and Be careful what you say to Ryan right now." I asked him why he sounded like that. He just said he would call me back in a couple of days and hung up. That was the first time I wondered if my brother knew more than he was saying. 2 days later, Ryan suggested we go out to dinner. "Just the two of us," he said like it was a peace offering. "I know things have felt off. I want to fix that." He chose a quiet restaurant on the island with white tablecloths and a view of the water. It was the kind of place where people went for anniversaries or to make up after fights. I wore the blue dress he liked and tried to believe this could still be salvaged. He was charming at first. He ordered my favorite wine without asking. He reached across the table and held my hand while he talked about how busy work had been and how he missed us just being us. Then, as the main courses arrived, he slid a folder across the table. "I had the lawyers draw up some updates to the accounts," he said. "Nothing drastic, just some adjustments so we can move faster on the next project. It makes sense for both of us." I opened the folder. The language was dense, but the bottom line was clear. He wanted broader access to the trust, the ability to move larger amounts without my signature each time. He called it streamlining. I called it what it felt like in my gut. "Ryan, this is my parents' money," I said quietly. We agreed we would talk about anything over a certain amount. His expression didn't change. The patient's smile stayed in place. "Claire, you're being emotional about this. I've carried most of the financial weight since we got married. I'm asking for a little trust in return. Or are you saying you don't trust me anymore?" The question landed like a test. If I said yes, I didn't trust him, then I was the problem. If I signed, I gave him more control over the one thing my mother had tried to protect for me. I closed the folder and set it beside my plate. "I need time to read it," I said. He didn't argue. He just nodded like he had expected that answer and went back to his steak. But something in his eyes had gone flat. The rest of the dinner was quiet. When we got home, he went straight to his office and closed the door. I stood in the hallway for a long minute, listening to the sound of his voice on a phone call I couldn't make out. That night I couldn't sleep. I went back to the storage room and pulled out the rest of my mother's box. At the very bottom, underneath some old photo albums, I found a small external hard drive in a plastic bag. It had my mother's handwriting on a label, "Family Files, Keep Safe." I didn't know what was on it. I didn't plug it in that night. I just held it and wondered how many other things I had missed because I had wanted so badly to believe the life I was living was real. The next morning, I called Jenna back. I asked her if she would be willing to meet me somewhere off the island, somewhere Ryan wouldn't think to look. She said yes without asking why. I also reached out to a private investigator Derek Hale had been recommended by a colleague at work. I didn't tell Ryan. I didn't tell Lauren, my best friend since college, because something in me had started to wonder why she always took Ryan's side when I mentioned feeling overwhelmed by the money conversations. I was standing at the kitchen island with the hard drive in my hand when Ryan came downstairs. He looked at it, then at me. "What's that?" he asked. "Something of my mother's," I said. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. He stepped closer, that same calm expression on his face. "You don't have to dig through old boxes to feel close to her, Claire. I'm right here. We can figure this out together." For the first time, the words didn't land as comfort. They landed as control. I slipped the hard drive into my bag and picked up my keys. "I have a meeting," I said. "I'll be back later." He didn't try to stop me. He just watched me walk out the door like he was already calculating what I might do next. I drove off the island with the windows down, the marsh air thick and salty, and for the first time in 3 years of marriage, I didn't feel like I was leaving home. I felt like I was finally leaving something I had been pretending was safe. I didn't know yet how deep it went. I didn't know that Lauren had been helping him move pieces around for months, or that my brother's secret empire was the leverage Ryan had been holding over all of us. I only knew that the woman who had walked into that marriage believing love meant never having to question the person beside you was already gone, and the woman driving away from the island that morning was someone I was still getting to know. I drove straight to a small cafe just off the island, the kind of place with mismatched chairs and strong coffee that didn't pretend to be anything fancy. Jenna was already there, sitting at a corner table with her laptop closed and both hands wrapped around a mug like she needed the warmth. She looked older than I remembered, or maybe I just looked at her differently, now that she had become the first person willing to say the quiet part out loud. We didn't waste time with small talk. She slid a printed statement across the table. The numbers were stark. Over the past 14 months, amounts had left the trust in patterns that didn't match any of the development projects Ryan had shown me. Some went to shell companies I'd never heard of. Others moved through accounts tied to a name I recognized immediately: Lauren Ellis, my best friend since we were 19. I stared at the page until the lines stopped swimming. "Lauren," I said, and my voice came out smaller than I wanted. Jenna nodded once. "She's listed as a consultant on 2 of the transfers. The paperwork looks legitimate on the surface, but when I dug a little deeper, the invoices don't match any real work. It's paper cover." I thought about every conversation I had had with Lauren in the last year. The ones where she told me I was lucky to have a husband who handled things so I could focus on my clients. The times she had gently suggested I was overreacting when I mentioned feeling shut out of the finances. Every single one of those moments rearranged itself in my head, like a puzzle I had been holding upside down. I thanked Jenna. I paid for both our coffees even though mine was still full. Then I drove to the address Derek Hale had given me for his office in Charleston. It was a small suite above a bookstore, nothing flashy, which somehow made me trust him more. He was in his early 40s, quiet, the kind of man who listened more than he spoke. I told him everything I knew so far: the trust, the diary, the dinner, the hard drive I still hadn't opened. He took notes without interrupting. When I finished, he closed the notebook and looked at me directly. "I can start pulling records tomorrow," he said. "But I need you to understand something before we go further. Once we open this door, your husband will know someone is looking. Men like him usually have contingency plans. Are you prepared for that? I wasn't." But I nodded anyway. That night I went home later than usual. Ryan was waiting in the living room with the lights low, a glass of scotch in his hand. He didn't ask where I'd been. He just set the glass down and stood up. "You met with Jenna Walsh today," he said. It wasn't a question. My stomach tightened. "How do you know that?" "Because I pay attention to what matters," he answered. The calm in his voice was worse than anger. "Claire, I've been patient with this paranoia of yours, but it's starting to affect our marriage. I spoke with Lauren earlier. She's worried about you, too." The mention of Lauren's name landed like a stone in still water. I thought about the transfers with her name on them and felt something sharp and final click into place inside me. "I'm not paranoid," I said. "I'm looking at numbers that don't add up, and a husband who keeps asking me to sign things without explaining why." Ryan stepped closer. He didn't raise his voice. He never did. "I've carried this family financially since the day we got married. Your brother's little empire wouldn't even exist without the connections I helped him make. You think I don't know what Tyler has hidden? I've protected you from that. And this is how you repay me, by running to some old financial planner and a stranger with a private investigator license." The threat was wrapped in silk. He was telling me he knew about Tyler's secret dealings and that he could expose them if I kept pushing. My brother had built something quietly over the years, something that wasn't entirely clean, and Ryan had found the leverage and kept it like insurance. I didn't argue. I walked past him to the bedroom, closed the door, and locked it for the first time in our marriage. I sat on the edge of the bed with my mother's hard drive in my hands and finally plugged it into my laptop. Most of the files were old family photos and scanned documents, but there was one folder labeled simply Recordings. Inside were 3 audio files. The most recent one was dated 6 weeks ago. I clicked play with the volume low. Lauren's voice came through first light and familiar. He's getting suspicious again. Claire asked about the Charleston property last week. I told her it was tied up in permits like you said. Ryan's voice answered lower, steady. She'll sign eventually. She always does when I frame it as protecting her. Just keep doing what you're doing. The transfers to your account are clean enough. There was a pause, then Lauren laughed softly. You know I hate lying to her. But you're right. She's too soft for this world. She'd rather pretend everything is fine than face what it actually costs to keep a life like this. I stopped the recording. My hands were shaking so badly I had to close the laptop. The voice I had trusted for almost a decade was helping my husband drain the one thing my mother had tried to leave me untouched. And they were doing it while talking about how fragile I was. The next morning, Tyler called before I had even finished my coffee. His voice was tight. I looked into the companies on those transfers. 2 of them route back to Lauren's Consulting, LLC. The third is tied to a holding company Ryan set up 6 months after you got married. Claire, he's been building this exit ramp for a long time. I told him about the recording. There was silence on his end for several seconds. Then he said, I'm coming to the island tomorrow. Don't sign anything. And don't be alone with him if you can help it. I spent the rest of the day in a strange, suspended state. I answered client emails. I walked the beach path behind the house. I smiled at the neighbor, Sophia Grant, when she waved from her driveway. She asked if everything was all right, and I said yes, because that was still the easier answer. But when I got back inside, Ryan was in the kitchen with a new set of papers. These are simpler, he said. Just a temporary authorization so I can move the funds for the new project without calling you every time. Sign them, and we can put this behind us. I looked at the papers. Then I looked at him. I heard the recording Ryan. For the first time since I had known him, the perfect calm cracked. Just for a second. His jaw tightened and something cold moved behind his eyes. Then the mask slid back into place. You're going to believe a manipulated audio file over your own husband, he asked quietly. Lauren warned me you might do something like this. She said you've been spiraling since your mother died. The gaslighting was so smooth it almost worked. Almost. But the recording was still in my bag, and the numbers Jenna had shown me were still in my head, and Tyler was already on his way. I picked up my keys again. I'm going to stay with a friend tonight, I said. He didn't try to stop me. He just watched me leave with that same calculating expression. You're making a mistake, Claire. When this all falls apart, remember, I tried to keep us together. I drove to a hotel on the mainland. I didn't call Lauren. I didn't call any of the friends who had spent the last year telling me how lucky I was. Instead, I called Victoria Lang, the lawyer Derek had recommended. She agreed to meet me first thing in the morning. Then I sat on the edge of the hotel bed and let myself cry for the first time since Jenna's phone call. Not loud, just quiet, exhausted tears that felt like they had been waiting for months. The next morning, Tyler arrived at the hotel with coffee and a folder of his own. He looked tired in a way I had never seen him. We sat at the small table by the window while he showed me what he had found. Ryan hadn't just been stealing from the trust. He had been using Tyler's hidden development deals as collateral for loans Ryan took out in both our names. If I pushed too hard, Ryan could drag Tyler's entire operation into the light and take us both down with it. He's been patient, Tyler said. That's the part that makes it worse. He didn't rush. He just waited until you were invested enough that leaving would cost you everything. I thought about the 3 years of marriage, the way Ryan had always framed every financial conversation as something he was doing for us, the way he had slowly pulled me away from the friends who asked too many questions, the way Lauren had been right there the whole time, smiling, listening, reporting back. Victoria Lang arrived an hour later. She was sharp, direct, the kind of woman who didn't soften bad news. She listened to the recording, read the statements, and then looked at me. You have enough for a strong case, she said, but it won't be clean. He'll fight dirty. He'll use your brother's situation against you in the court of public opinion, even if it never sees a courtroom. Are you ready for that? I didn't feel ready. But I also didn't feel like the woman who had driven off the island 2 days earlier anymore. Something had shifted. The fear was still there, but it was sitting beside something steadier. I'm not signing anything I said. And I want every transfer traced, every conversation recorded from now on. If he wants a war, he can have one, but I'm not going to keep pretending this is a marriage. Tyler reached across the table and squeezed my hand once. I should have told you about the Empire sooner. I thought I was protecting you by keeping it separate. I was wrong. We sat there for a long time without saying much else. Outside the hotel window, the traffic moved in both directions. People going to work, going home, going somewhere. I didn't know yet what my direction was going to be. I only knew I wasn't driving back to that house on Kiowa until I had a plan that didn't involve giving Ryan one more piece of me. That afternoon, Derek called with the first real batch of records. The picture was even uglier than I had imagined. Ryan had been building a quiet exit for almost 2 years, moving assets into Lauren's name through layers of paperwork that would take months to unwind. And Lauren hadn't just helped. She had suggested some of the structures herself. I listened to Derek's summary without interrupting. When he finished, I thanked him and hung up. Then I opened my phone and looked at the last text Lauren had sent me 2 days earlier, asking if I wanted to get lunch to talk about how you've been feeling lately. I didn't reply. Instead, I saved the recording file to a secure folder and sent a copy to Victoria. Then I sat on the hotel balcony and watched the sun start to drop toward the water. For the first time in a long time, the quiet didn't feel like something I was supposed to fill with explanations or excuses. It just felt like space. I still loved the version of Ryan I had married. That part was going to take time to untangle, but I was starting to understand that the man I had loved had never actually existed outside the story he told me about himself, and the woman sitting on that balcony was finally done living inside someone else's story. The next morning, I met Victoria Lang and Derek Hale at her office in Charleston. The room was small and bright with a view of the harbor that felt too ordinary for what we were about to do. Victoria had already drafted the initial filings. Derek had a stack of records that showed exactly how Ryan and Lauren had moved the money. When I played the recording for both of them, Victoria didn't flinch. She just nodded once and said, "This is good. This is very good." I asked her what would happen next. She told me we would file for divorce and a temporary restraining order on the accounts. We would also send a demand letter to Lauren's consulting company. If they fought, we would go to court. She was honest about the costs, both financial and personal. "He will try to make this ugly," she said. "He will leak things about your brother. He will paint you as unstable. Are you ready for people you thought were your friends to believe him?" I thought about Lauren's laugh on the recording. I thought about the texts from other women in our circle who had already started asking careful questions after Ryan posted a vague message about challenges in our marriage. I nodded. I'm ready. Tyler stayed on the island that week, helping me pack what I actually wanted from the house, while Ryan was at work. We didn't talk much. There was too much to say and not enough words that felt safe. He told me he had started unwinding some of his own hidden deals, the ones Ryan had been holding over him. It would cost him, but it was cleaner than living under someone else's leverage. I told him I was sorry I hadn't seen it sooner. He told me he was sorry he had let Ryan use me as a shield. On the 4th day, Ryan showed up at the hotel. He didn't knock loudly or cause a scene. He just stood in the hallway with his hands in his pockets like he was waiting for a business meeting. When I opened the door, he looked past me at the suitcase on the bed. "You don't have to do this," he said. His voice was still calm, still patient. "We can fix this. I already told Lauren to stop taking calls from you. She understands now that you're not well." The mention of Lauren made something inside me go very still. I stepped into the hallway and closed the door behind me so we weren't in the room together. "I have the recording, Ryan," I said. "I have the transfers with her name on them. I have statements from Jenna and from Derek. You can keep telling people I'm unstable, but the paper trail doesn't lie." For a moment, the mask slipped again. His eyes went flat the way they had the night I mentioned the recording at home. Then he recovered. "You think anyone is going to believe a bitter wife Over a man who built half the new construction on this island? He asked quietly. Your brother's name is on half those deals. You drag me through court and I drag him with me. Is that what you want? I looked at him for a long moment. The man I had married had never existed. This was just the version he showed the world when he needed something. I felt the last piece of hope I had been carrying for him finally let go. What I want, I said, is for you to leave. And I want you to know that every time you try to use my brother against me, I'm going to send another copy of that recording to another person who matters. Victoria already has instructions. If anything happens to Tyler's reputation, because of you, the recording goes public. He didn't answer. He just turned and walked back down the hallway. I watched him go and felt nothing except a strange, quiet emptiness where the fear used to live. Over the next 6 weeks, the legal process moved faster than I expected. Victoria filed everything. The accounts were frozen. Ryan's access to the trust was cut off. Lauren's consulting company received a demand letter that made her go silent on social media. A few of our mutual friends reached out, at first confused and concerned. Then the rumors started. Ryan told people I had been struggling with my mental health since my mother died. He said I was making wild accusations because I couldn't handle the pressure of our lifestyle. Some of them believed him. Amanda Price, who had been at our wedding, stopped answering my texts. 2 other women from the Island Book Club sent polite messages about giving space. The group chat I had been in for 3 years went quiet whenever I posted anything. That was the part that hurt the most. Not Ryan's betrayal. I had already seen the truth of him. It was watching women I had called friends choose the comfortable story over the messy one. They didn't want to believe that a man as charming and steady as Ryan could slowly dismantle someone's life from the inside. It was easier to believe I had broken. Tyler stood by me through all of it. He testified in a deposition about the pressure Ryan had put on him. Jenna provided statements about the transfers she had flagged. Derek's records were clean and thorough. When the judge granted the temporary orders, Ryan's lawyer tried one last negotiation. He offered a settlement that would have left me with less than half of what was legally mine if I agreed to keep the recording private and drop any mention of Lauren. I said no. The final hearing was short. Ryan sat at the defense table in a suit that cost more than most people's rent, looking every inch the successful, reasonable man. I sat beside Victoria and didn't look at him once. When the judge ruled that the trust assets would be returned to me in full, and that Ryan would face further civil proceedings for the fraudulent transfers, I felt the air leave my lungs in one long, quiet breath. It wasn't triumph. It was relief. The kind that comes after you have been holding your breath for months without realizing it. Lauren settled quietly 2 weeks later. She paid back what she could and signed an agreement that kept her name out of the public filings. I never spoke to her again. The last thing I heard about her was that she had moved to Charlotte and was telling people she had been used by Ryan too. I didn't correct the story. I just let it go. Ryan fought the divorce for another 4 months. He leaked pieces of Tyler's old deals to a local business blog. Tyler lost 2 contracts before he could finish unwinding everything. It cost him, but he told me it was worth it to be free of Ryan's leverage. We don't talk every day, but we talk. That feels like enough. Most of the friends from the island are gone. The ones who stayed quiet when Ryan spread his version of events. The ones who still have dinner with him and pretend they don't know what happened. I don't miss the dinners. I miss the version of myself that believed those people had my back. That version is gone, and I don't want her back. I live in a smaller house now, still on the water, but not behind a gate. It's mine. The trust is mine again. My work has grown because I'm not constantly managing Ryan's moods or his stories. Some nights I still wake up and reach for the other side of the bed, out of habit. Then I remember there is no one there to explain myself to, and the space feels like freedom instead of loneliness. Jenna still checks in every few months. She never asks for credit for being the one who made the first call. She just asks how I'm sleeping. Derek sends me a holiday card every year with a short note that says, "You did the hard thing." Victoria sends me invoices and the occasional article about financial abuse cases that are starting to get more attention in the courts. I keep all of them. Ryan still lives on Kiowa. He still tells people I was unstable. I know because Sophia Grant, the neighbor who waved at me that last morning, ran into me at the grocery store and told me she was sorry she hadn't said anything sooner. She said most people knew something was wrong but didn't want to get involved. I thanked her and kept walking. I don't need their validation anymore. The last time I saw Ryan was in the parking lot outside Victoria's office after the final settlement was signed. He was getting into his car. I was walking to mine. We looked at each other across 20 feet of asphalt. He didn't smile. He didn't look angry. He just looked like a man who had lost a calculation he thought he had already won. I got in my car and drove away without speaking. That was the last time. I don't hate him. Hate would mean I still gave him space in my head. I don't. What I feel instead is a clear, steady boundary. He does not get to take any more of my time, my money, my story, or my peace. My brother is still untangling the mess Ryan helped create, but he is doing it on his own terms now. My mother's trust is back where she intended it to be. And I am 30 years old next month, living in a house I chose, working with clients who respect my time and answering to no one but myself. If someone had told me 2 years ago that the price of keeping my life would be losing almost every friend I had on that island, I would have said it wasn't worth it. I would have been wrong. The cost was high, but the alternative was staying small inside a story someone else wrote for me. I am done being small. Thank you for listening to my story. If any part of it felt familiar, I hope you know you don't have to wait for someone else to hand you permission to choose yourself. The door is already open. You just have to walk through it.